Good afternoon. My name is Barbara Velasquez, and again, it is my pleasure to welcome you to Metropolitan Community College and programming in honor of Women's History Month. It's a little chilly and a little soggy outside, so it's a great time to join together and learn from about marvelous women from a marvelous woman. Women's History Month had its origins as a national celebration in 1981 when Congress authorized the week of March 7th, 1982 as Women's History Week. Later, Congress designated the month of March in 1987 as Women's History Month. And since 1995, presidents have issued a series of annual proclamations designating the month of March as Women's History Month, celebrating the contributions women have made to the United States and recognizing the specific achievements women have made over the course of American history in a variety of fields. The 2021 national theme for Women's History Month is Refusing to be Silenced. Your microphones will be shut down during the presentation, but at any time you may send your questions through the chat to moderator Barbara Velasquez. Our speaker will consider your questions after her lecture in the Q&A period. We also ask that you complete the online evaluation and include your name and contact information to be considered for year-long recognition. The online address will be on a slide at the end of the program. It is mccneb.edu/IIE-EVAL. Please welcome Ms. Amanda Ponce, MCC Success Navigator, who will introduce today's speaker.
All right, thank you, Barbara. Good afternoon, and our MCC family and community members, and most importantly, Sylvia Mendoza. I have the great honor of introducing her today. So Sylvia Mendoza is an award-winning author and journalist who writes inspirational stories about strong visionary women who change the world and are powerful examples of living with passion and purpose. She was raised as a Navy kid. She lived in different versions of paradise like Hawaii, Guam, San Diego, and later in life, Puerto Rico. Being uprooted, often her constants were reading and writing and learning about different cultures and the fine art of people watching. This combo fueled her passion for storytelling. She went on to earn degrees in journalism and has written ever since. Her classic collection of mini biographies, The Book of Latina Women, 150 Vidas of Passion, Strength, and Success, was selected for the California Collection for high schools by the California Readers Association. Also, Sonia Sotomayor, a biography, launched Zest Books Middle School Living History series to inspire young readers with the true story of the first Latina Supreme Court Justice. Both won first place in the International Latino Book Awards. Her novel, Serenade, won the prestigious Latino Award for Best Romance. Sylvia has written more than 1,000 articles for many publications, earning awards for excellence in journalism. Sylvia also has been featured by the National Women's History Project by C-SPAN Book TV as a thought leader and one of 50 voices of the future in journalism at UC San Diego Extension, and as one of 25 influential Latina leaders. Invited to a private forum with Ms. Masal Renford, Israeli delegate to United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. As the president of Mendoza Communications, a writing and editing service company, Sylvia helps authors find their voice, tell their stories, and publish their work. Teaching journalism and creative writing at UC San Diego UC San Diego Extension brings her love of the written word full circle as she witnesses the next generation of inspiring leaders. Please help me welcome Ms. Sylvia Mendoza as she presents Inspiring Latinas, Change the Narrative in American Culture.
Thank you so much for all of that, Amanda. Sometimes you have to remember the things that you've done in my 60 plus years of life. I've always wanted to be a writer, so it's thrilling that I could be here today to share some stories that I've been able to write about women. And for some reason, I think I was probably in my 30s when I had the opportunity to write the Book of Latina Women. And ever since, my mission, it feels like, has been to write about inspiring women. And that's in articles or other books. It doesn't matter if it's fiction or nonfiction. You know, I feel like it's time to lift women up. And more specifically for me, Latinas, I write for several different magazines that are Latino based. And it's just been an incredible, insightful journey for myself, for me to look inward and see these inspiring women. And really, they call me out basically to be a better woman, a better, teacher, a better mother, a better writer myself. So it all comes full circle when I do this. But I wanted to thank Metropolitan Community College for having me today. And Women's History Month, of course, is one month that I really love to celebrate because of all this work that I do in elevating women in their presence in the United States. I wanted to start, I'm going to show a PowerPoint throughout this lecture and hopefully just highlight a few of the women that I've written about. But more importantly, it's going to really, hopefully, I would like for you to think about where you are in your life, because we're the ones that can change the narrative. And if not us, we're going to, hand it down to our children and grandchildren, our students, our colleagues, and have everybody be able to tell their own story. Okay, so I'm going to start with the PowerPoint. Excuse me for 1 second while I start this. And so here we are, changing the narrative in American culture. And the women that I've written about, some has been in research, some has been in articles and all of that, and interviewing them have really set the tone for my work as a writer and as a professor. However, there's been news, in the news recently. We had the attacks on women, Asian women in Atlanta recently. And my alma mater is USC, and we got this email from the president, Carol Folt, who it was a very touching, email for us to take account of what's happened and what's happening in our world today. And so I really like to think about that because, sometimes I think for every 10 steps forward, we go 20 steps back where women are concerned. And she said that these attacks were rooted in racial, gender, and sexual bias. And so I think, first of all, I wanted to read just a little bit about her email to us, and just so it can set us straight on where the story is today. So she said, like so many around the world, I was heartbroken by the tragic events in Atlanta that took 8 innocent lives, 6 of them Asian women. It's saddening and deeply upsetting that these attacks, which appear to be rooted in a mix of racial, gender, and sexual bias, come amid a disturbing rise of anti-Asian violence in our country. And we've seen a lot of that unrest for Black Lives Matter, for our Latinos all over the United States and at the border with immigration issues and all of that. So going on to the, I also look at the New York Times. There's a column called In Her Words. So it's very specific to women and women's issues today. And it was on the same happenings in Atlanta. So this reporter, Alicia Haridasani Gupta, she said it's intersectional. The shootings underscored for many women how racism and sexism are inextricably linked, leaving them uniquely vulnerable to violence and discrimination. So, we take a moment to think about these women who've lost their lives, whose lives were taken so abruptly. But what I'd also like for you to think about are all the women that have gone before us, either in violence or just have passed, and think about their contributions to our world. And it doesn't have to be so spectacular, but their presence in our world really does make a point of changing the narrative for women and for marginalized societies. And so for this reason, I'm just thrilled, to be here to talk about the uplifting stories we have for women, and more specifically for Latinas. So I'm just going to tell you, as a writer, this is where I think women's stories matter, right? It gives us a voice. We document achievements and change the narrative. We don't have to, be that stereotype that people see us sometimes. We can shatter all those images and shatter the glass ceiling. But my big point is to respect the women who have gone before us. Sometimes we forget that there have been so many trailblazers and they didn't have it easy, to get to where they are in all areas of life and all career paths. So we have to celebrate their stories when we can. And here, I'm going to start from where I am right now. I just finished a story on the Latina Golfers Association. It's the very first time we've ever had a thing like this. I just started golfing again a couple years ago and found this group and was fascinated by Azucena Maldonado, who is the founder of the group. We have now 2,500 members across the United States. But I did get to interview this young woman, Monica Arevalo, and she is in mid-20s. She got her degree in mechanical engineering, and she's a member of the Latina Golfers Association. But she said that she's in these fields, but this is her norm, basically. This is her norm. So I thought, wow, that's great. This is her norm, whether you're in engineering or whatever other career. This is what we want for our young women, our daughters and our grandkids and all that for the future, that you're the norm, that you don't have to go through all these hoops and all of that to be the first in your field or anything, but all these doors have been open to us. But the thing is, how did we get here? How did we get here? So I just want, to look at some of these people. In my book, there's 150 remarkable Latinas. And since that book, I've interviewed so many others that have made their mark in one way or another. And like I said, it doesn't have to be a spectacular thing, but they have changed something in their community. They've showed their passion for what they do, their purpose and all of that. And all these women just have set the path for us to do what we are doing. Okay, so this is a thing that we have to honor them, I think, and respect them. And I always go back to thinking about these women who, from the other centuries and in the early in the 1900s and the 1920s and all of that, what they had to do to excel in their careers. And so when I got the opportunity to do this book, the first edition of the Book of Latina Women came out in 2004. And then this one came out in 2013. And I kept thinking, wow, I should upgrade it again. But the thing is that the women that are in here are like a Bible to me. So they're sort of the foundation for all these other stories that I do, because I don't think I need to revise it. They're just timeless. And so what I loved about this, I worked with an artist, Aide Martinez from Orange County in California. And she did this book cover for me. And it was spectacular. It's how I felt about writing these stories, right? It's like they're full of sunlight and enlightenment for all of us. And for me, I felt like this woman in the picture, right, that raising your arms. And I felt like I was a cup, and then all these stories were just pouring into me. And my job was to write something, and they're very short biographies. I mean, it doesn't do them justice, probably like 800 words per woman. But my job was to make them known to others, to share their stories, and then pour the stories out of the cup, right? So from here to reach other people and students so that they can see where we've come from. So here, I love the theme, for your Women's History Month, refusing to be silenced. These women did all of that, and they're in all fields, as you can see here, from educators to athletes to writers and sciences, politicians. That's everything I cover and more. So this is, I'm going to focus on a few women, because otherwise I could talk for hours about each woman. So I'm going to focus on like these fearless Latinas who changed the narrative. What did they all have in common? And what do they still have in common as I interview new people every day for these different publications I write for. So hard to come up with the things, but this is sort of goes across the board for all women from all areas of life and backgrounds. And I found that they were passionate. They had a purpose. They weren't seeking fame or fortune. They believed they could improve their lives, their children's lives, their community. So they had to stay focused on that purpose. They spoke up for the underdog. They were educated, and not book educated in all cases, but if you are being an advocate for something, you want to educate yourself to the circumstances so you can make a better impact. And that's what I found. They educated themselves, maybe not through college or books, but through experience and research. They refused to settle. They would not take no for an answer. So that was not an option for them. And finally, I thought most of them had compassion and empathy for the communities they were working in. So I have a little quiz. Amanda, I wish you would just help me out here, but everybody can do this quiz. It's just very simple. I have several of them throughout the PowerPoint. So it's matching the name on the right to the description on the left to the description on the right. So the first Latina astronaut, does anybody know who that is? Okay, the second one is Mother Teresa of Puerto Rico, who gave up all her wealth to help the poor. And then the third one is the interpreter who helped Hernando Cortez communicate with the Aztecs. And then D says 1930s botanist. She self-financed her own expeditions and discovered thousands of plant specimens that many were turned into medicine. And then the last one says Tex-Mex singer whose untimely death started the very first People en Español magazine. So you can guess. We'll come back to that. Or Amanda, do you want to pipe in? Do you know any of the answers?
I do. So for the first Latina, that would be 3, Ellen Ochoa.
That's correct. Okay, so then we have
a hand raised.
You have what?
We have a hand raised. Someone might want to guess.
Oh, well, they can write them in the chat, or whatever, but if you know them, great. And if you don't, you're going to know them. So we'll go on. I won't give you all the answers yet. We can come back to that. So the first one I was thinking about was the women who didn't take no for an answer. And my favorite one is Ellen Ochoa, okay, our first astronaut. So here's her story. Okay, she's from San Diego, where I live right now. She was a great student in math and science and everything. I'm going to read this just so I don't mess up on this. Okay, so when she graduated high school, she was wondering, okay, what am I going to study? Physics, or am I going to go electrical engineering or math? And so she went to a physics instructor who told her she could not enroll in his classes because they would be too hard for a girl. Okay, right? No. Okay, and she got the same message from the engineering department. So what did she do? Do you think she gave up? Do you think she said, okay, well, I'll go into something else? No. Okay, so she decided to major in physics, no matter what, at Stanford. And then she got her doctorate degree in electrical engineering. So she proved all of those guys wrong, and she wouldn't let it stop her. And she went on to get hired by NASA, put in like 2,000 hours, I think it was 2,000 applicants. And out of those, only 5 women got into the astronaut program. So she was the first Latina. And then she went from there and now became an inventor for NASA. So I just thought, how cool is that to be told no by male instructors, no on this side. And then she just went ahead and did both of those, no matter what. So there is a lot of women that will fall into a lot of these categories that you will see. So that was one, that they wouldn't take no for an answer. Stood up for the underdog, okay? My hero is Dolores Huerta. Okay, so she has worked for 60 years. Think of this, more years doing activism than I've been alive. Okay, than I've been alive, and I'm 60, almost 61. So, you know, she was known as the Dragon Lady. I had the honor of meeting her a couple of times and interviewing her, and she's this tiny thing, and she wouldn't let her size, you know, matter when she was up against all these big farmers or industry leaders. Um, she just wouldn't take no for an answer either. And she just was adamant that she wanted to improve the conditions for farm workers and for, you know, civil rights for all, including women. She was the mother of 11 children. So it's just like she knew where women were coming from, that they needed work, they needed fair pay, you know, and all these different rights. And she has continued that journey through her foundation all these years. So she was just in San Diego last fall, I want to say, when I saw her last. But that impression of being so purpose driven to help others and be their advocate is just what makes her my hero. I mean, who can say that they've been, you know, with a cause for 60 plus years of their lives? It's just huge. And what she's done for them has been incredibly huge. These are also activists, and they're just, I wanted to get a variety of different things. Minerva Bernardino, she was working with, you can see in the picture, Eleanor Roosevelt, and she was a co-founder for the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. And this is way back in the 30s and 40s. Rosie Casals, a tennis player who is great in the 70s, she stood up for women, not only on the court, but women's rights and the women's movement. So she was the first Latina inducted to the Women's Tennis Hall of Fame, and started the Women's Tennis Association, helped found that. The Mirabal Sisters, I think their story is the one that turned my life around in dedicating most of my life to writing about inspiring women. So the Mirabal Sisters were from the Dominican Republic, and they sort of started an underground, just to put it simply. I mean, you could do a whole series on just these women, right? The Mirabal Sisters. So they were from the Dominican Republic, and they started an underground revolution to overthrow the dictator, because he was just horrible to them and their livelihoods in the whole country. And so Trujillo, the dictator, said that his greatest enemies were the church and the Mirabal Sisters. And if you saw these women, they were three young, tiny women, mothers, and all of that. And to say that they were threats to him was incredible to me. But they stood up for not only improving the lives of their family and their kids, but for their whole country. And they were willing to die for that cause. And they actually were assassinated by Trujillo's people, supposedly. And they went on to start the International Day Against Violence Against Women that's been ongoing ever since. So these women who gave up their lives to improve their livelihood and their country's livelihood really made me think about, oh, what am I doing with my life? So they were one of my big research projects for the Book of Latina Women. And I just thought, all I do is write. You know, all I do is write. How is that like compare, you know, how does it compare to someone like that who is willing to give up their lives? But what I realized in that journey and that whole process of writing about these women was that everybody has their own talent. You're here for a reason and your purpose. And I finally came to peace with like, well, writing's my thing. And so let me just celebrate these women and others who, you know, and uplift them and share their stories with others when I can, because I can write, you know, so that's my thing. So I'm not giving up my life or anything like that, but I'm doing my part, I think, in telling their stories. And I just want people to know where they have come from, and the paths they opened, not only for their country, but for international causes about violence against women. Okay, so this other one was Age Wasn't a Factor. There are a couple here. Okay, so Ines Mexia she's a botanist, an adventurer. So this book, by Darlene, and I can't read it, sorry, but this book is about her. But what I loved about her, with no age limits, she went back to school in her 50s, and that's when she started her career as a botanist. And she would do these self expeditions down to Mexico and South America to find all these plant specimens and send them back to Harvard, I believe, where they were made into medicines, and then they were classified and all of that. But she just would go on her own. She would get a guide, and fearless, she would just do that in the jungles of South America. Chita Rivera was, let me see, I just want to make sure I don't mess up on Chita Rivera. She's been around for a long time on screen, stage, and she's a singer and dancer. And she has won several Tony Awards. And she also was given an award by President, no, I don't remember which president. But anyways, she, at age 70, she went back to the stage, and she starred alongside Antonio Banderas in The Kiss of the Spider Woman. And I thought, oh my gosh. So on stage, singing, dancing, 70 years old or 70 plus years old. And she didn't let that stop her, because that was her passion. Rebecca Lobo was on the dream team, Olympic dream team. And she was the youngest of all the women that were on that team, and also was the youngest player to star in the women's National Women's Basketball League. So she was the first for that. Age doesn't matter, however young you are or however old you are or in between, you can still do whatever you want. Okay, so these are the first. And here, I don't want y'all to feel so intimidated, because I think people think, well, I'm not the first to do this, or I'm not the first to do that. And I think, well, there always has to be a first for something, but that doesn't mean we have to be first in our field or whatever, or in whatever community service we're doing or anything like that. But there were firsts that really made a difference to me. Okay, so Sonia Sotomayor, in all my research and listening to her and meeting her, we all know that she's the first Latina Supreme Court Justice. But her life wasn't easy, right? It's not like she just woke up and became a lawyer and then a judge and now a justice. I mean, she went through her heartaches. The thing that I loved about her story was that at age 8 or 9, she already knew she wanted to be in law. She loved the orderliness of it. And sorry, that went ahead. But she was amazing, and that she had diabetes and she had to give herself injections. She had an alcoholic father who died when she was young. And then she had a single mom. And so all of those things helped fuel her. She really experienced a lot of racial injustice in school, even by teachers who didn't think that she could pass those tests and be that smart because she was Latina. And so they would make her retake tests, and she would do them and still get 100%. And so it was just like those kinds of things that led to that tenacity and that perseverance, that nothing was going to get in her way to become, a lawyer and then a judge and then now the justice. Nothing was going to stop her. And I thought, how inspiring just that, when you're that young and you already know that this is my path. Okay, so other women, just briefly, Linda Alvarado here, she is the first woman, first Latina to ever own a professional baseball team, the Colorado Rockies. Nelly Galan was the first Latina to own her own entertainment industry. It's called Galan Entertainment in Hollywood. And she did shows that would bring the Latino culture into mainstream America. Fabulous, and she is a self-made entrepreneur, and her latest book is called Self-Made, but all of that started with her entertainment background. Christy Helbeger, and forgive me if I say that wrong, pronounce that wrong, but Christy I found also fascinating, because she said she didn't see any Latinas like her, or people that look like her, women that look like her in magazines and all that when she was growing up. So she was the founder of the first magazine for Latinas, and it was Latina Magazine. So she started that whole trend, and then now we know there's so many magazines for Latinas right now. Dr. Antonia Novello, she was the first Surgeon General of the United States, you know, and this was, she followed that path of medicine and public health because she herself was so sick as a kid that she wanted to help mothers and women and children as she went up through the ranks and finally ended up as the first Latina Surgeon General. Judy Baca, I hope y'all know Judy. She's a fabulous artist, muralist, basically. She did the Great Wall of Los Angeles, and it spans like a mile of art. She's brought in the community to work with it, but she was the first, she started the first mural project in Los Angeles and has kept that ongoing. So it gives a presence, and if you saw the Great Wall, it has all these different people from all different backgrounds just coming into different places and how they convene in Los Angeles. It's really beautiful. It just shows like hope. I think it's very idealistic. Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, I considered her in, you know, in many of my research findings, she was considered the first feminist of the New World. And this was in the 1600s. And what I loved about her story was that she was so young and she begged her mom and dad to let her go to school, to, you know, cut her hair and dress her like a boy so she could go to school because girls couldn't. And so when they said no and all that, they sent her off to be sort of like a nanny of the day with a family that had books, and they let her use all these books, and then she started collecting her own. And then when her parents wanted her to get married, she said no and went off to the convent where she was able to study at her leisure and write and write and write. And she wrote all these poems and just beautiful pieces of literature until one of the bishops took away all those rights from her, and she was relegated to just caring for other nuns. But up until then, she was fabulous with her thirst for knowledge, right? Her thirst for knowledge. And then we have Rita Moreno, also she was the first Latina to win all the 4 entertainment awards, right? The Emmy, the Grammy, the Tony, and the Oscar. And she's just been around. She's still like acting all the time. And she's a fabulous, just energy ball. I've ball of energy for our communities and for the arts. She's just a big advocate for the arts. And I did get to meet her again. She's so tiny. And I thought, my gosh, maybe it's like they make a big presence no matter where they go, no matter their size, their age, any of these things, and their backgrounds. And I'm just always fascinated by the women I keep meeting and researching. Okay, here's your part 2. Amanda, you ready? Okay, so this is a famous Venezuelan fashion designer. There's one. And then the Queen of Salsa, Azúcar, is what she would yell out when she was on stage. The youngest gold medalist for the US Olympic basketball team, Dream Team. First Latina Surgeon General of the US. And then the Queen of Folk Music, who performed at Woodstock. And she led in many anti-Vietnam protests and started Amnesty International. Okay, so do you know any of those?
Yes, so I'm going to say Celia Cruz, the Queen of Salsa Music, Azúcar.
That's right. Anything else? What about Dr. Antonia Novello?
Our first Latina Surgeon General of the United States.
That's it. Okay. And so we'll see the rest of these in a minute, but if you know those answers, you can write them down. You should be testing your knowledge, and we'll see, because we have to celebrate these women. Okay, so those women that spoke through the power of words, there's of course millions, I think millions of incredible writers, but they made a statement, right, for us. So Lola Rodriguez de Tio, she wrote La Borinquen in Puerto Rico. She's Puerto Rican. And that was the battle him for their revolution way back. I don't remember when that was. Okay, so but she was the one who wrote their ballot. Sandra Cisneros, I hope everyone knows the house on Mango Street. She gave a face also, you know, a presence to Mexican families that live here that were integrated, and what life was like in her neighborhood. But it changed that whole perspective of what people had in their minds about how stereotyped we were. Isabel Allende from Chile, and now she lives in California, is an incredible author, and she's just written tons of stories based on relationships mostly. They're just fabulous with magical realism and all these other factors that put her on the map. She sold millions and millions of books. Gabriela Mistral was a poet that now there's a Gabriela Mistral award for writers and poets. And then Dr. Yasmin Davids, she's from California at USC. Now she has her women's leadership, Latina leadership program that she started there. But what got me into her was that she wrote this book called Empowering Latinas. And it was a book like I'd never read before, where she challenged Latinas to break boundaries, break away from family members that were toxic, you know, and all these different things that really were taboo to talk about before, just to empower yourself. And it's just sort of like that thing about if you take care of yourself first, then you can take care of others. And it just sort of broke all these stigmas on, you know, how family, I don't know, Latino families, you know, sometimes can be toxic or can hold you back in traditional things that, you know, instead you should be moving forward. But she just challenged that norm. And I thought that was one of the most powerful books I'd read at the time about Latinas, because I'd never read anything like it before. And then the doctors, healing us mentally, spiritually, and physically. This is, she was in our quiz already, Sister Isolina Ferrer. She's from Puerto Rico, and she was from a very, very wealthy family. And she gave it all up because she wanted something more with her life. She ended up coming to the United States. When she was a nun, she worked with gangs. She worked in very poor rural areas in bringing this kindness of Mother Teresa to these marginalized communities. And she was fearless. She'd walk, you know, in New York in the middle of gangs and just try and get them to listen, you know, to God's word, to find solutions, better solutions to the lives they were leading. Dr. Helen Rodriguez Tio is also from Puerto Rico, but or her family is. But in New York, she worked in public health. And what I loved is that she really, again, worked with marginalized communities in public health, trying to be an advocate for the women that were not given good treatment, mental or physical, medical treatment. She stood up for these women who, a lot of Latinas and Black and brown women would be sterilized without their knowledge. And she brought that to light and ended up getting a award from the President of the United States for her work, unending, you know, advocacy for women and their health. Because can you imagine, I kept thinking, can you imagine these poor women who would go in for surgery or whatever and then be sterilized while they were there? I was appalled, and that she would take this on as her own purpose-driven mission. Okay, so through the arts, we have these women. I hope you know most of them. There's Joan Baez. She sang with Woodstock and anti-Vietnam protest. Lola Beltran, you know, she did rancheras. She would just sing all over the world to presidents and emperors and kings and queens all over. We already know Celia Cruz. Gloria Estefan is Queen of Caribbean music, right? And Selena is the one who started People in Espanol when she was with her untimely death. Susana Guzman was an interesting interview for me because I hadn't heard of this either, right? She's an opera singer. and has been on stage all her professional life, but she also brought it back to the community in Los Angeles. And she wanted to teach children about opera, to get over the fear, or, to build their curiosity and not be afraid of learning about opera and going to opera and appreciating this kind of the arts. So I think that was a huge undertaking for her, but she made a presence. And these are other arts in the arts. Alicia Alonso, she started the Cuban Ballet. Carolina Herrera was a fashion designer. Frida Kahlo, one of the most famous artists from Mexico. And Marisol Escobar worked in the 1960s, alongside Andy Warhol. And just their presence, what they've added to us as creatives in this world. So it's in the arts, on stage, on the screen, all of these different women that come from all these backgrounds just add so much richness, bringing in the culture, of wherever they're from to what we know today in the arts. These entertainers, Chita Rivera, we already know, has all the Tonys and her work on stage. Dolores Del Rio was a silent film star back in the 20s, and she went into talkies later, but was well known there. Daisy Fuentes was the first VJ, so a video, like a DJ, but on MTV. She was the very first Latina there. And then Rita Hayworth, bombshell of the 40s and 50s. And Rita was born Margarita Cancino from Mexico. And she just changed her whole image so that she could be this Hollywood bombshell. But her presence, she had this incredible presence and did celebrate her artistic life, because her family was a group of dancers that they performed together regularly until she became this big star. So she added to that whole richness of that culture. Okay, so here we have, this is my last quiz. Hopefully you know some of these by now. 7-time Wimbledon tennis superstar who founded the Women's Tennis Association, helped found it. The United Farm Workers Voice, okay, human rights activist for 60 years. The first Latina US Supreme Court Justice. 1940s glamorous Hollywood pinup girl. And then the first Latina entertainer to win all 4 major awards, Emmy, Grammy, Tony, and Oscar. Okay, Amanda, you're on.
Okay, so we'll start from the bottom. First Latina entertainer is Rita Moreno.
Right.
Right. And then the glamorous Hollywood pinup girl, Rita Hayworth.
Right.
And then Supreme Justice Sonia Sotomayor.
Correct.
And then United Farm Workers, Dolores Huerta. And then the last one is Rosie Casares.
That's it. Perfect. 100%. So, okay, so these are just some of the women that I've had the honor and privilege of writing about. But going back to this, I wanted to reiterate, okay, so now maybe you can see some of how I came up with this, these fearless Latinas who changed the narrative. They were passionate or believed in their purpose. They spoke up for the underdog. They were educated. They refused to settle and wouldn't take no for an answer. And they practiced compassion and empathy. So I know that if you look at the women that I've just run through so briefly, and look at other women who you see in our communities today who are big advocates for change, agents of change, you're going to see that a lot of this is built into what they are and who they are and how they affect our communities. So it's like, from there, where do we go from here, and who creates the narratives? So we know our daughters, our sons, and then we can change the narratives as mothers, mentors, maestras, educators, right? We can all add to the narrative, change the narrative, break the stereotypes, shatter those glass ceilings. I listened last week to Isabel Allende, that one of my favorite authors. She was doing a book signing online, and she was talking about her son, who she says is a great feminist. And he runs her Isabel Allende Foundation, which helps women and children's organizations around the United States, mostly in California and Chile, from where she's from. But anything about domestic violence or to better the education for the children or give them resources. So that's what her foundation does. But her son runs that. And so she said, what we have to do is educate our sons, not just our daughters, right? And to empower them to think of how they can help women, how they can be their advocates. And that way, we go forward in our future stories, in the future narrative with these strong, she said, they're not weak. They're actually more powerful and stronger, these men who are that aware of all that's going on, because women are the foundation for so much in our country, in our communities. So I found that very interesting, and I think, okay, have I done that? I have one son and two daughters, and I'm hoping that I've treated them all the same. I think my son is a good man, a good husband, and a soon-to-be father. And I just think that whatever I have instilled in him, I'm hoping that he takes that on, to the next generation, his own children. But it is our responsibility to create these worlds, a better world, but it's how we comport ourselves and the values that we teach our daughters and our sons and students and our friends and family. And I think that's one way that we can move forward with a better narrative of where we are and not be a stereotype. For me personally, I just think I want to keep telling more stories about these incredible Latinas, right? There will never be a dry well. There are people coming up all the time that I want to interview because they inspire me so through their work or through their purpose and their presence in our world. So I just, think about what can you do in wherever you're from, whatever your background is. Think about, how can we change the narrative? How can you in your work or as a woman, as a man, as a community contributor, improve the narrative so that we are stronger as Latinos or as women or as families, communities. We all have this story. I go back to that. We all have these stories, and I believe everybody has a story to tell. These women were, profound catalysts of change. And just, even the ones in my books and some of the others that I've interviewed, but I know that there are women around us all the time who lift us up. And that's what I want to keep thinking about, lifting us up and each other up. So I'm hoping that their stories will give you some basis for moving forward in a different way and just seeing yourself. You don't have to be, like I said in the beginning, you don't have to be the first in a field or first in, whatever purpose you're looking to change. But just make a presence and have your story told. I think it's so important that we document each other's stories. And this quote I just love from Rita Moreno, because I think we also have to be conscious of the women that went before us and where our roots are from. But she said, never, not for 1 minute have I forgotten where I came from or who I am. And I think that's vitally important, as we move forward. So Amanda Gorman, I hope all of you know about her, our poet laureate, who was at the inauguration. Be the light. That's become my motto for the year. Be the light. But this is what we can do: is be the light for each other and for ourselves and for future generations and the legacies we leave by changing that narrative. If we don't like what's the stories that are being told about us, then we can change it. We can't just complain. We can change it. So that's it for my presentation right now, and I'm anxious to see if there's any questions. But it was very delightful to do this research again for all of you.
So Sylvia, thank you so very much for such a robust, interesting, amazing presentation. I'm sure that everybody learned something today, no matter what expert they might be. And we do have some good questions coming in. But before the questions, I'd like to point out that an audience member shared that Ellen Ochoa, who was in your presentation, is an alumni, the TRIO programs, which Metro has many students who are supported by TRIO programs. And we, I just want everybody out there who's in TRIO or knows of TRIO to make that connection.
That's awesome. I love TRIO. We have that at my campuses too, where I teach here in San Diego. Brilliant program.
Excellent. So for the Latina who is hesitant to write or doesn't know where to start, what are your recommendations as their first steps in starting to write?
Turn off the editor in your head and just think you can. Whatever you have to write is valuable. So I would say you can do two things. Start your own journal, and just write down whatever it is you want to do. If it's a book, then you could just start taking notes. If it's poetry, put that in your journal. If it's just about reflection, put that in your journal. If you want to go farther, and think about books down the line or other big things, I would say take a class, writing class. Creative writing class, so fun, and it really is about your voice because we need all these different voices. So even if you don't have a background in writing, there's always, you can start from where you are today.
I love that comment. You're reminding me of a previous presentation, recent one, where the presenter reminded us that is in so many different forms. It's not just the book that we always think of, and how people need to think about blogging, et cetera, et cetera. I think it helps those who don't know how to get started. So I do appreciate that.
Yeah.
One of our audience members would like to know a little bit more about Dolores Huerta and what did she do in history?
In history, oh, well, I think she was a huge advocate, as I said before, for the United Farm Workers Association. She worked side by side with Cesar Chavez, but she wasn't afraid to get out there and protest in person. She was arrested, I don't know, I think half a dozen times for being out there, but she wasn't afraid of that, right? So she felt like she had to make change for our farm workers and other marginalized communities because she was always out there with civil rights. Things had to improve. So she was glad to be a spokesperson. And what I love about her is that she sort of planted the seed for all these other people, including her family. So her kids, her granddaughters, I met 2 of her granddaughters who are working for her now. So I think she planted the seed so that others would step into those shoes and, keep the fight going for improving people's lives that are on the margins, right? Our migrant workers, our farm workers, and then those that are suffering from social injustice in any way.
Here's another question. Hi, Sylvia. Thanks for this. How have the Latinas that you have studied and interviewed found light in the darkness? More to the point, what was their advice for cutting down on the drama?
Yeah, that's a great question. I just keep thinking that I think a lot of those women that went before us, right, the trailblazers, I think they were on their own, and so I think they might have had to go through that dark period or through that dark tunnel longer than we might have to now, because we have so many resources at our fingertips. But I think that they just stuck to their purpose, those 5 things that I've learned about writing about these kinds of women is that they just didn't veer. I mean, I look at Sonia Sotomayor, as a little kid, all these curveballs were thrown at her to stop what she was doing, and she wouldn't. She loved school, she loved being educated, she loved reading, she loved everything to do with education and the law. And so it's just like, even though teachers, would question her intelligence, she just plowed through it and said, okay, give me the test again. So I think it's women like her, it's all these other trailblazers who, yeah, they just somehow persevered. I don't know how they persevered, because some of those places were dark. I mean, especially for those that don't have the resources we have now. So they just persevered. That's all I can think of that they all have in common.
And sort of along that line, Sylvia, to go back to Dolores Huerta, I know people have said, and not to take anything away from Cesar Chavez, but I know that people have said that he really got most of the press for the same kind of work. Would you agree?
Yes. Yes, and I agree with you too, not to take away from Cesar Chavez, who actually, they worked side by side, honestly. But to me, look at, as a mother, and she's out there taking care of not, these women and children and the men, all of them, just to improve things. But yeah, I think she got the short end of the stick kind of thing, but she wasn't afraid. I just admired her. That honestly, you guys, if you haven't met her in person, she's such a tiny thing, but I kept thinking, man, she was up against these great big corporations and farm owners and stuff like that. And they're the ones that dubbed her the Dragon Lady, because she just would come at them with fire and just not be afraid, but I think it was just part of that mission.
So as we are considering your book about the many, many Latinas and your continued interviewing of fascinating individuals, I'm wondering if our audience members would like to know how you find the access to people. How did you get started? How would you encourage them to find some of these marvelous individuals?
Wow. There's so many books out there right now, though. I know Dr. Vicky Ruiz from the UC Irvine here in California. She's a historian, and she's actually in my book, but the work that she's done has given a voice to other, again, all these marginalized women, Latinas and Chicanos in mostly California, but if you just look up these Latinas, because she wrote an encyclopedia of Latinas with Maria Sanchez, I believe it is, but they put together this huge book of other Latinas that aren't in my, and they're much more research, I guess. Mine were just more like on the journalism side, very short, to the point, like a jumping off point. So if you like somebody in the book, you can go and find more information on them. So you would Google them, right? But like Dr. Ruiz, man, she has done so many books about the women who, like here in San Diego, that the women who worked in the canneries, that back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the canneries were huge and flourishing and everything. But if you looked inside the factories, there were all these women, lots of Mexican women that were working in there, and they were the backbone of this industry. We don't even know those stories anymore. So I would think, just if you look it up in any college, you can go through the library and JSTOR and all those databases, but there are so many books now, like from Dr. Ruiz and others like her, who have finally documented stories that need to be documented.
Thank you for mentioning intersectionality in the quote at the beginning of the presentation. Intersectionality is usually associated with the negative aspect, but as an Afro-Latina, how do you see the positives of intersectionality?
Well, I think that's where we are today, right? And especially with Women's History Month, it's like, this is our narrative. This is our chance to change the narrative. So if there's something out there that is seeing us in such a negative light, then we can change it, or we can challenge it and say, that's not how we are. So like in my media studies classes, I teach this old film, but the study is on the Mean World Syndrome. And Dr. George Gerbner was a an expert at communications and the effects of it, of, I don't know, on violence on television, for example, on people. And what we know is that the images that are portrayed are so unfair and unjust and stereotyped that it like transcends all these other different realities, our realities. So if all these Mexicans on, or Mexican Americans on television are portrayed as gang members, then the general mainstream America is going to think that we all come from the barrio and have grown up in gangs or near gangs, you know? And so again, it's up to us to change it. What I love about, you know, even that industry, the movies and television, is that those things are changing because we're getting better writers, you know? And so we have that power to change the narrative and keep it positive. And whatever we promote out there and say, oh, well, you don't know about being an Afro-Latina? Well, here, why don't you read this? Or why don't you check this instructor out? Or that kind of thing, these classes out. So it's in our power to change that narrative ourselves.
We're getting many messages that say that they so appreciate, Sylvia, your focus on uplifting people.
Yeah. You know, can I interject on that? Because when I started out at USC with all these internships I had in newspapers, I had to work everything, all the different desks, and that was many, many years ago. But it really, I just remember clearly this one story I did, and it was about this kid who came from El Salvador. He was 16 years old, and they left there, he and his mom left there for a better life, right? And to get out of that oppressive living environment. And he came here and he was killed by a gang, drive-by shooting. And so having to interview his mother on the phone was, for me, I could feel her anguish and her pain and everything. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I had to write this story, and it ended up being not so much of a news story, but a feature story on her and their life and seeking this better life. And I thought, this is what I want to write. I want to write about the people affected by these, you know, atrocities and tragedies, but also the uplifting part of it, because there's too much sadness and anguish around us all the time. So find the good stories. And that's why I love writing about inspiring Latinas.
Thank you. So we'll have one last question. Well, a couple, well, two last questions, but of the 5 points that you gave about being fearless, where would you place yourself?
Wow, good question. I think I would like to see myself more in that compassion and empathy area. And it was very interesting last year when I spoke at UC San Diego Extension for Women's History Month with a panel of 5 of us, 6 women. We were asked, well, men don't say that they're leaders as compassionate and empathetic leaders. They don't see themselves or describe themselves that way. And we all looked at each other on that panel because we'd already, all of us had talked about empathy and compassion. And I don't know if it's a woman thing, but I know that it's a human thing. And, you know, to be able to put ourselves into other people's shoes, even as a journalist, and when I teach journalism, I tell my students, please, before you interview somebody, put yourself in their shoes and think about the questions you're asking, your body language, the respect you're showing, because, you know, we're guided by the journalism code of ethics, and it's like minimize harm and seek the truth. And so that's what I want them to know, that, you know, put yourself in their shoes and really think about, what is the story? Is it newsworthy? And for me, it's always going to be about doing feature stories that are uplifting. So I'm hoping that that brings out the compassion and empathy.
Okay, so here's our final question. Obviously, Sonia Sotomayor was a special interest of yours since you created a biography for her. Is there another character that you just want to dive deep into more research and explore?
Wow, that's loaded because, you know, when I did the Book of Latina Women, I thought, oh my gosh, I could write a book about each of these women. So I don't think I have that time or the, you know, that whole thing, but I don't know, just women, again, those that went way before us. I would love to do something on even like Rosie Casals. I mean, this woman in sports, right? Because now all these women are in sports like nothing. But she really was a fireball, and she, you know, fought for women's rights and everything back in the women's movement era. And I think maybe someone like her, I want kids to know. I wish I could write more of those books for kids, you know, middle grade and high school, um, just so they know that they're there, that they were there, and that's how we got to where we are today.
Thank you. Your presentation, your gracious nature, your thoughtful answers to all the questions are so, so appreciated. Audience members are sending in, what a very interesting presentation. We appreciate your research and and the way you have shared it with us. So thank you very much, Ms. Sylvia Mendoza. We're just delighted to have had you here. I want to say a special shout out to Amanda Ponce, who even audience members are sending thanks to Amanda for making such an interesting presentation by your participation.
Yes. Thanks, Amanda. You were in the hot seat.
So, and this audience of, you know, I fear springs is showing its signs, and everybody will say, no more Zoom for me, I'm out of here. But what a wonderful response today. We want to thank everybody for showing up and being intent. So thank you for that. I would like to remind you, and Posey will put up our slide, that we have an online evaluation at mccneb.edu/IIEEVAL. Include your name in that evaluation if you want to be considered for recognition throughout the year. And finally, our next program will actually be tomorrow evening, 6:30 p.m. The Power of Engagement Beyond Voting, One Woman's Story. Adjoa Asamoah, the National Advisor for Black Engagement for the Biden-Harris campaign, and the Black Engagement Director for the 59th Presidential Inauguration.
Wow.
Zoom in with us. Some of you may remember that she was coming to Metro last March. She was our very first cancellation due to COVID. So we are delighted to have her back, and we know that we can have an amazing experience with her virtually. So we hope to see you tomorrow night.
Sounds good.
Thank you again, Sylvia.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. And please look up all these wonderful Latinas and lift them up and lift your stories up too.